This video is going to be about the reading paper, the different sections of the reading, and how best to sort of tackle these questions. But more importantly as well, we also should talk about the sort of time that you have to actually do these activities. So the reading and the use of English paper is a combined paper, okay? And you can see here that you have 1 hour, 30 minutes to complete both, okay? And the reading part of the exam is these following parts here. So it's part 1, part 5, 6, 7, and 8, okay? And for use of English, it's only part 2, open, close, part 3, word formation, and then part 4, keyword transformations, okay? Now, with the time that you got here, 1 hour, 30 minutes to complete all these things here, you have to be quite careful with how much time it takes you to do each section, and especially in relation to the reading questions, okay? So what I've done here is I've taken a look at each of the different parts, the points involved, and tried to give you an indication of sort of how much time perhaps you should be spending on each of these parts, okay? So part 1, it's the sort of text where you get sort of multiple choice answers for each question. It's sort of A, B, C, and D, okay? Each of these questions here is only worth 1 point, okay? And if we look at sort of the amount of time that you've got for the reading, and we work out sort of percentage-wise how much time you should be spending, it works out to about 12 minutes. Okay. Now, I think probably most people could get through this part of the question in sort of less time. Let's say you did it in 5 minutes. That means there's 7 minutes left over here, which perhaps we could add to sort of part 6 here. Okay. But essentially, if you look for each of the different parts, it's between sort of 15 and 20 minutes. Okay. Now, part 5, each of the questions, there are 6 questions, are worth 2 points. Okay. So we've got about 19 minutes here, okay? Part 6, where you have the 4 different sections, okay? You've got to talk about sort of he has the same opinion or someone has a different opinion, okay? Here, there are 4 questions and there are 2 points, okay? So as I said, if we sort of take away some of this time, add it to here, again, you're looking at sort of 15, 16 minutes, perhaps, for completing this task, okay? Part 7, which seems to be a problem for everybody, okay, 6 questions, 2 points each, there are 12 points. Again, sort of 20 minutes, more or less, okay? And the last part where you have sort of 4 or 5 different sections, you get 10 questions, 1 point each. Again, excuse me, we're looking at about 16 minutes, okay? So if you add up all of this here, okay, we're looking at about 78 minutes. Okay, and that gives you then sort of 12 minutes to go through the use of English, okay? And these are the points here that are represented for each part, okay? So you have to be a little bit careful with the amount of time that you have, okay? I know a lot of people doing the exam, they sort of get to sort of 5 minutes to almost to the end of the exam and they realize they've still got a whole paper to look at, okay? So when you're practicing sort of the reading parts here, I would definitely suggest that you spend the time that you've got in the exam and use that time in your practices, okay? So let's go through to a reading question and let's have a look and see in a bit more detail, okay? So let's go back first of all to part 1, because we know this is part of the reading part. Okay, so this part here, and you've got your multiple choice A, B, C, D answers here. I mean, there's lots of things that you should be looking at here. Vocabulary certainly is one of them. Prepositions certainly is one of them, looking to sort of how what preposition is followed, what sort of adjective or verb would precede such a preposition, okay? Words that have very similar meanings, okay? For example, here, exploited, extracted, exposed, extended. You know, you have to think very carefully about meaning, look at the context of the sentence, okay? So I think most people within sort of 5 minutes can sort of get through this sort of question here, okay? So let's look to part 5. Right, okay, part 5, we know we have a long text, Okay, and we can see here the text is about the internet today. Okay, and you're going to get 6 multiple choice questions. It's A, B, C, and D. Okay, now you can save your time. You can save some time here by not necessarily reading the whole text. Okay, you know that, for example, question 1 is going to be probably in sort of paragraph 1. Okay, and we can see here that for 32, we just need to look at sort of lines 13, probably sort of 12, 13, 14, and 15 to find the answer here. So that doesn't necessarily mean we need to read the whole of this second paragraph to find the answer. Okay. Other questions here, we know that it's in the 3rd paragraph, so we just read that part. We know that 34, it's only in the 5th paragraph, so just concentrate on the 5th paragraph. And you can sort of save some time, not necessarily reading the whole text, but just looking at to where the questions are directed in the sort of reading, okay? It's certainly worth going through answers which are not possible. Okay, sort of take away the ones which are not possible for whatever reason. Concentrate on, usually there's like 2 possibilities, okay, and look at those. So perhaps, for example, A is not possible and D is possible, but then you think perhaps, well, P or C is possible. Well, this is where you can sort of have a look and sort of just look for B and C, concentrate on what's written in this first paragraph and look for the answer there. Okay, so you can save some time here, not by reading the whole text. Okay, let's move on to part 6. Okay, and part 6 is typically, it's going to be 4 sections. Okay, in the questions here, it's about art. Okay, and we've got academics here with their names talking about the contribution to the arts in society. Okay. Now, I would suggest at the beginning that you look through these questions here first, because you're going to have to identify from each of the sections these kinds of answers. Okay, so for example, which academic has a different view from North, one of the academics, with regard to the effect of the arts on behavior towards others. So you'll need to find out what North says. Okay, and then you'll need to find a different view to what he or she says. Okay, but this question here regarding the effect of the arts on behavior towards others, it's going to be that you're going to have to read perhaps A, C, and D in relation to this question. Okay, so look through what the question is, and as you're reading through the first part, try and highlight where is that in the text. Okay, and do the same for C and then D, and then you can find out, well, which one has a different opinion to this guy here. Okay, there's always going to be a question, for example, in 39, expresses a different opinion to the others on whether the human species has a genetic predisposition towards the art. So you're going to have to read through all 4 parts, and they will all 4 talk about this, okay? And whether or not, I mean, sometimes it could be not, the human species has this disposition towards arts, okay? So you're going to have to sort of read through the 4 parts and find them. And there will be one that has a completely different opinion to the others, okay? So before reading, just quickly go through and find what the questions are asking. And then as you're reading through, you're going to try and highlight these particular questions, okay? Now, in relation to well, perhaps we should come to that later on. Let's move on to the next part, and then we'll talk about order perhaps later. Right, part 7 is sometimes a problem for lots of people, okay? This is where you have to sort of read the text, and we're looking to fit in these parts here back into the text, okay? So you will need to read before and after, okay, to get sort of an idea of context of what is being spoken about, but perhaps as well sort of grammatical sort of elements of language, okay? For example, here after 41, it says, later inside a cozy hut, sporting a patch over the sore of my eyes, I have to admit that it probably is. Well, your answer to the question here is going to have to answer this question. Well, what is it probably? Okay. And there'll be something in this part here that will answer this question. Okay. Let's just look just quickly here at the first part. So I'm stumbling, blinded by tiny misses of ice and snow driven horizontally into my face by a howling gale. So obviously we can see here it's an unpleasant place, very windy. We've got sort of ice and snow, okay? So much so that he's blown backwards, or she's blown backwards, okay? Then we've got this introduction of elephant seals, okay? And we can see sort of at the end that we refer to these elephant seals as beasts, okay? Because they're quite large animals, okay? Now, you'll need to find one section here that will go in this space. So it's worth reading through all of them at the beginning, okay? And I would suggest that once you've read through A, you put a little summary comment here, okay? So if you read through A, it says, this is mainly in the form of rabbits, introduced in 1877 as a food source, recent estimates of the rabbit population. So we could put here that basically A is about rabbits and the introduction of that, okay? And if we read B, we can see it's a realization that makes all the more impressive the endeavors of the first explorers here at Brothers Point, perched on the headline of the island's east coast. We could be the last humans on Earth, and in geographical sense, we nearly are. So we could talk about endeavors, and we could talk about isolation, okay? So you sort of give a summary to each, and then as you're going through 42 and 43, and you're sort of understanding the context, well, you can say, well, hold on, this is about perhaps rabbit population, or perhaps this is about sort of the geography of where they are, or it's about the walk that they're doing. And you can see very quickly, without having to read again, what each part is about, okay? Now, our answer here for 41, we talked about the fact that there are animals, there's this element of the weather, okay? And we have to try and answer this question, what does is refer to, okay? And if we look at the answer, which is going to be F, we have the answer to these questions here, okay? At night, they are indistinguishable from the rocks that cover the ground. Well, what does they refer to here? Well, they refers to the beasts, and the beast we know refers to elephant seals. Okay, and you can't distinguish between them and rocks on the ground, okay? Only their gurgling barks tell me when to jump. Again, they're referring back to they, which refers back to these animals. As I lose feeling in my fingers, so that gives us the weather-related cold, wind, etc. Numbed by glacial temperatures, I ask myself, is this what I sailed to the bottom of the world for, okay? Now, this very much then refers to our sentence here. I have to admit that it probably is. This is the reason why this person has gone to the ends of the earth, if you like, okay? So we can see here, we've got something that fits before, and we've got something that fits afterwards, okay? Now, it may well be that you sort of have to read a bit more than just the first line. You might need to sort of even read the first 4 lines in order to get some sort of connection to what the answer is here in 42, okay? So it's definitely worth reading sort of before, getting an idea of context, okay? It's definitely reading afterwards as well, okay? And looking for some sort of connection, either in what's happening or either in the language, okay? That will give you a connection to before and after, okay? Right, okay, let's move on to the last question. Now, the last question here, we've said, is about 4 or 5 different sections. Here we've got 4 sections, okay? And we've got to answer these 10 questions, okay? Now, I think it's worth going through the questions and it's just looking to see what the question is being asked, okay? So, for example, which section comments on which person laughs within a verbal exchange? So when you're talking, who is also laughing at the same time? Okay, so as you're reading through A, you've got this question at the back of your mind, that someone's talking and laughing at the same time. Okay, and it will sort of help you sort of answer the questions because you know what questions are being asked. Okay, so quickly go through and just read through what kind of questions. Detrimental effect. Described laughter as having a detrimental effect. I mean, that's going to be important here, okay? And why would laughter have that particular effect, okay? describes people observing themselves. Again, why would people be sort of looking at themselves or observing themselves? Obviously, they're not going to be using these words. You're going to have to paraphrase and think about how it could be written, okay? And you'll need to go through and try and answer as many questions as you can, or what you think are possible for A, okay? And if you've got sort of 4 sections here, we know probably it's going to be sort of 2 or 3 answers for each. Okay, as you're going through, you're going to have less and less choices to make. If you go through A and you answer 2, answer B, perhaps there are 2 or 3, that's only going to give you 5 left. So by the time you've got to D, whatever is left, hopefully, should be the answers for D. And if you're running out of time, this may well be some way of sort of saving yourself time, because you know that whatever answers left, if you've answered them properly, should be the answers for D. Okay, now we should go back and talk a little bit about how many points are available for each section. So we can see here that in part 5, we've got 12 points, and part 7 as well. And I would suggest that you start doing part 5, okay? Then do part 7, and then part 8, and then part 6. Essentially, it represents the most amount of points for the time that you've got, okay? More or less each section is going to take you about 20 minutes, but this part here will give you 12 points and not 8 points, okay? So part 5, part 7, part 8, and then part 6, okay?